our conversation tonight is about exactly that, the future of this industry, but the future of this industry when it comes to survival for small business during what a crazy year 2020 was, and of course 2021 has already started to be as well, from COVID to Brexit and beyond. Lots and lots to talk about. As we mentioned, our first FashMash Live of the year, following last year's discussions that really took us on a journey through all sorts of different areas, really, didn't they? From, I was trying to remember some of the best ones: sustainable storytelling, circularity and scaling circularity, retail reopenings. Goodness, we had so many different ones. Of course, social justice, that was one of our last ones at the end of the year, which was such an important one. So many big topics to explore, so many more coming up over the next few months, which we've been doing lots of planning for and we're really excited about. But for tonight, we're on small businesses and the year ahead. So I can't wait to dig into this.
I should say, actually, one of my favourites of last year was actually the very last one, which just felt like a Christmas party via Instagram Live.
And
I had at least 1.5 cocktails. And my final highlight I think my final highlight was probably TikTok for 2020. And I was on flying form. Yeah, and I should also say a delightful piece of news that we can enter the new year with is that our sponsor, Klaviyo, are with us for a second year. So we're delighted. It really wouldn't be possible without them. They are a brilliant e-commerce marketing platform for brands of all types, all shapes, all sizes. From Hummingbird Bakery to 111 Skin to High Studio. We have actually recently transferred our own marketing onto their platform, and we've been really impressed by how easy it was to do, first of all, and how great the customer service team have been with any queries, small or large. And then just also the insights that we now have through doing that and the precision targeting. So we would highly recommend it. If you would like to try it out, go to klaviyo.com/fashmash and you can start your free trial today.
Amazing. So shall we jump in? We're starting the beginning a little bit differently, aren't we, this time around?
I've decided to shake things up, and rather than asking you what is inspiring you this month, I wanted to ask you, Rachel, what has caught your eye this month?
I know, and do you know what? I love, as a journalist by training, I love the nuance of that question, because actually it is very different. Because one of the pressures of saying what has inspired you this month is that it has to be positive, I think. Yeah. And actually what's caught your eye means it doesn't necessarily have to be. On that note, however, I am going to say something positive this time around. It's a subject, well, I think it's positive. It's a subject I've talked about many, many times before, but I'm back on thinking about all things degrowth and how changing our economic system lies at the heart of beating or at least averting the climate crisis. So what's caught my eye this month is the amazing economist Jason Hickel speaking on the Wardrobe Crisis podcast about his book, which is called Less is More: How Degrowth Will Save the World. It's a really, really excellent episode. He talks about degrowth specifically in the context of the fashion industry, which I haven't heard many other people do before. Obviously, it's been something I've been writing about, but most of the time, obviously, you hear an economist speaking, it's much more broadly, and it's very interesting to hear it applied to one sector specifically and what would be possible. But he also goes into decolonization and racism and so many of those topics that we've been exploring, obviously, over the past year and beyond. So really, really good. I also love the fact that this episode is not hosted by Claire Press herself. She's been running a series called, this last series has been called Share the Podcast Mic. And it takes its inspiration from, of course, the Share the Mic initiative that ran in the US and here in the UK. And it basically means that she's been handing over that role of host to BIPOC voices, leading the conversation in sustainability and ethical fashion. So it's really, really powerful. But also, I think what's really interesting is it brings an amazing variety of content, which is fantastic as a result. So that's my recommendation. Check that one out. We will share the link to it. Yeah, really, really great one. What about you? What has caught your eye this month?
And that's a good point on our links. We have a lot of links this time because there were so many excellent reference points that Rachel and I found when discussing this topic. So Hannah from our team will be sharing the links throughout this conversation for you to save. For me, I'm going to put my hands up and say, it was really hard to find anything to catch my eye, really, since the beginning of the year. I felt very like my typical news sources felt quite repetitive or out of touch. And then my typical podcasts actually were just making me feel really pressurized to overachieve and feel like I wasn't doing enough, when actually in January, when it's so dark, part of me just really wanted to breathe a little bit and take a bit of time out. So I was struggling to find anything to catch my eye. But then I came across Livia Firth's column for Vogue Arabia, her monthly column, and it's all focused on the Renaissance. And as ever, it's hugely energizing. I'm actually going to reference it as part of this discussion later in the hour. And then beyond that, you know, let Bridgerton, obviously, I shouldn't just spend the hour talking about Bridgerton. I was
wondering if I could say Bridgerton, and then I was like, no, we can't say Bridgerton. It's February.
We can't say Bridgerton. No, what has caught my eye, and it's really thanks to you, Rachel, I'm sure it's caught everyone eye, it's Clubhouse. And I kind of did an eye roll when I heard about it. I just couldn't face another social media platform. But then Rachel inspired me to take another look at it and think about how it could be used for our community. And actually something that I really want to do, well, we both want to do over the next week, is just poll all of you and get your thoughts on it, because we do think that there are ways that this new app could be used for the FashMash community. We're going to be putting polls and stories, and on the feed we're going to be asking you questions about it, and we would love to get your thoughts, because hopefully it's caught lots of your eyes and ears as well, and I think there's potential there for the year ahead.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued to get everyone's responses. I feel like some people watching would have immediately also eye rolled, and they're already users, but I know there are others who are users who will be really up for that. So yeah, fascinating one. Can't wait to hear what people say. So small business, let's dive in. That notion of survival as we evolve into the second month of 2021, of course, into yet another month of lockdown here in the UK. To put it mildly, with COVID continuing, things are super, super tough out there for business right now. And that's something that we've been exploring a lot with our members, our community, over not just the past month, since obviously we entered the new year, but indeed throughout all of last year as well. Some interesting statistics. According to The Guardian, nearly 2/3 of entrepreneurs believe their business may not survive the pandemic. That, of course, is broader than just fashion, but very, very interesting in of itself. They cite a study that comes from King's Business School that says an estimated 6 million small businesses in the UK, which supports 16.6 million jobs, are currently in a financially precarious position, which of course doesn't come as a huge surprise, and has definitely been something we've seen reflected in the conversations that we've been having. As I said, you know, some of those discussions have been really fascinating with many of our members. They've been, I guess, coming from, you know, all sorts of angles on it, really, in terms of how to survive it all, how to cope with it all, how to continue to grow and everything. And that's a lot of what we wanted to dive into tonight. It has been truly, truly fascinating. I think the first thing to say, of course, is that there's been huge uncertainty. That goes without saying, really, for the past 12 months. You know, stores are closed, lockdowns continuing, orders are totally up in the air as to whether to order them at all, and if you do, how much, and everything else. It's incredibly hard to find structure for the year ahead, which of course is one thing a lot of people tend to want to do as we enter a new year, is to obviously plan out what the next 12 months look like, which for the first time ever, really, or certainly within our lifetimes, has been almost impossible, bearing in mind, obviously, January 2020, none of us had a clue that this was going to be what the year unfolded like. So we heard from many people that we spoke to on this that really they feel as though they're just fighting fires, or indeed sort of treading water to just keep things going. And they're not really able to otherwise go above and beyond what one would normally hope to plan for. And I think that's really tough, you know, that idea of just pure survival over strategy, which of course is really, really difficult. And I think what's also interesting about this is that we've had this from all sort of different levels of business, haven't we? It's not just the really, really small one, or the ones that have got just a founder or a couple of team members, but indeed some of those that have slightly bigger teams within that bracket of small business and have been going for a really long time, as well as those that are completely new to the game. In fact, we had some really interesting conversations with people who had literally launched their businesses during the pandemic last year, which have been in of itself completely fascinating. So on the whole, you know, again, goes without saying, business is certainly slower for many of these companies that we've been talking to. And that's especially the case for those, of course, who rely on factories and warehouses, which obviously in our industry the majority do, and facing disruptions in all of those in many, many countries with all of this happening right now. That, of course, is the majority. But as we'll discuss in a moment, one of the things that is incredible about the small business sector, of course, is how flexible they're able to be. And I know that's something we're going to dive into in a little bit more detail. One thing that I've hugely admired, just as a final thing to say, that we've heard from all sorts of our different members last year and into this year, is just how they forged ahead anyway. And I kind of love that, you know, this idea of resilience, really just like rolling with the punches. It's super unpredictable, you know, in terms of things like lead times or uncertainty on order runs, for instance, and just making it work in any which way that they can has kind of become like the standard, the status quo. It's just like, we've just got to keep going. And actually, the amazing thing about that, we've heard from some people, and I hope that the people listening right now, that we get some nods from others as well. But we've heard from some of these small businesses, especially those I think that are focused on local business, is that they've had their most successful year to date when it comes to revenue as a result. And that is absolutely amazing. And most of the time it's because, of course, they've been able to double down on their D2C channels, which is phenomenally positive to hear, even if it's, of course, not been the case for everyone. But that's been like a real sort of, I guess, silver lining, is to hear the really positive stories that are out there as well, and to know that they do exist, I think, is a really good thing as well. It's not all total doom and gloom. There are some who are really persevering and doing an incredible job through all of this, which is, it's not just the Amazons, is my point. There are others.
Yeah, which is a huge relief to hear, and actually very unexpected. For one, Rachel, I really think that when we were first choosing who might be on it, who we might invite to the roundtable for small businesses, I thought it might have to be quite a kind of reality check of a conversation and quite a, you know, potential for doom and gloom. But it's not the case, and certainly further what I've been reading around this area, it's reflecting what you're saying. One of a metaphor that Renee McDonald, who is the founder of Lisu London. So Lisu London is a West London-based brand, quite a new brand, and it is really kind of silks with a beautiful twist, often inspired by Tanzania, which is where she grew up. And, you know, a successful small business right now. Now, it was fascinating to hear her perspective as founder when she said that small businesses are the little canoes next to the giant ships that represent the big brands. And that perfectly conjured up for me the situation that we're in. You know, these little canoes, they can dip and dive and go as far. I mean, I don't know many canoeing verbs. They're very active and flexible.
Nimble.
They're nimble. I thought that she really, that they're these swift move. Wait, I have actually got one here. They can paddle fast. I came up with that. And that is where their success is going to lie. Emily Cronin, who is fashion director of The Telegraph, she always writes these brilliantly insightful and often quite critical overviews of the industry, and she did one recently on small businesses, and she really nailed it for me. I'm going to actually just quote directly from her, and Hannah's going to add the link to the article so that you can all read it. So she recognizes the key attributes that make up these success stories. They've sidestepped wholesaling in favor of direct to consumer sales. They have charismatic, audience-facing founders who won't hesitate to interact with fans on social channels. They're agile enough to dial order quantities up or down, depending on interest, to pivot to meet the moment. They have a story that resonates. And we were lucky enough to be joined by 5 of these founders, these female founders, who I really feel exemplify just what Emily is pinpointing there as the success for these businesses. Along with that, for me, it really came down to a few more points. So first of all, they are abandoning tradition in favor of a model that suits the customer and that suits their manufacturing process. So one way they might be doing that is completely dropping seasonal, biannual fashion calendars and instead looking at micro collections. I think that's a term that's going to be really key here. And that doesn't challenge their supply chain too much, but it also meets customer demand. Equally, we might be taking that further and looking at pre-orders. Pre-orders are obviously very sustainable because you're only making as much as you need. You can gauge customer interest, you're getting the customer involved. And it's something that doesn't have the risk that is inherent in the typical wholesale or e-commerce buying model and strategy. Then social media is integral to these businesses. So all of those darlings of lockdown that we have discussed often on our FashMash live sessions, IG Live, Reels, TikTok. Now, perhaps the big brands have been saying, oh, there's no ROI for me, or they haven't been brave enough to try these platforms. But it's these small businesses that are just diving straight in, giving it a go, and that's where we're seeing the real success in these new methods of marketing. And of course, because they're new, they're not pay to play. Instagram's algorithm often favors things like Reels, as I'm sure lots of you know, so it's giving them more prominence too. A couple of great examples: Wise London, which is a female founder-led brand, beautiful cashmere, very colourful. So the founder often does Instagram lives, or very casually, almost kind of, I've watched them and they almost feel kind of, they're certainly unscripted, almost unscheduled, just being like, I'm in the design studio today, I'm considering this design or perhaps this design, and what do you think of this hem? Really interactive customer feedback sessions, which have proved invaluable and really have dictated the collection. And then Olivia Rubin, we've mentioned her before, the way that she will, I mean, I've seen kind of 10 p.m. at night share a CAD design being like, guys, what do you think? Should we do this? And if the poll answer is a yes, which often, more often than not, it is resoundingly so, within a couple of days, she has that up on her website for pre-order. She did that with loungewear, and that was at the very, very start of lockdown because she recognized the trend. And now it's given her cause to expand the brand into pajamas, into ceramics, all sorts of lifestyle pieces. And there's also examples from the beauty world. So Naomi Smart, who is the founder behind Smart Skin, which actually launched in like mid lockdown craziness last year. And she has a very direct and conversational relationship with her followers, obviously partly because of her background. She's one of the OG influencers and YouTubers, but also just as a founder who cares inherently and greatly about her brand. So it has sustainability at the core of the brand. And she told us all on the round table that the intelligence that she gets from her customers really helps her to dial up that sustainability. So for example, a couple of them have said the glass bottles which have a pipette at the top, they've been, and obviously the glass bottle is recyclable, the pipette is not, they've been giving her ideas about how to counter that non-recyclable part of the product, whether that's upcycling, whether that's a reusable one. So the conversation is very much there. Unlike big brands who lack the bravery and face a long sign-off process, these brands are able to be nimble, follow their gut instinct, and they have a unique direct line. And I think that's probably one of the last things that it's worth saying here. More often than not, certainly in our round table, it is the founder who is responding to DMs and responding to comments. And I do think that most of them would be reluctant to give up that direct line to their consumer, which I think would be unthinkable 10 years ago. And its success has really come out in the last year, the success of the consumer having that direct line of feedback.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And I remember, and I'm going to forget the exact title of what we called it, but we held one of these conversations back at the beginning of the summer, not long after we were obviously all just getting to grips with what on earth this lockdown situation was. And it was something like social media in the time of crisis, or, surviving.
It was marketing post-pandemic or something like that.
Yes, something along those lines, exactly. and one of the key messages from that was exactly as you say, it was around this idea that actually the examples of social media that were really doing the best through all of this were the founder-led brands. And it is really interesting because actually it's not that often that we have one of our roundtables with only founders on it. Often we have a real variety, but obviously the nature of this conversation being about small business, that was exactly the case. But yeah, it's really interesting what you say, and I think that direct line is particularly unique. Obviously, it's very it's very special, and obviously that ability to then turn things around, gives them obviously then, I guess, solutions through all of this as well, you know, ways to be able to build and grow and indeed ensure that they are going to also hit numbers by, you know, the example with Olivia of, you know, putting them up for pre-orders rather than obviously saying this is how much we've got, please buy them. The old-fashioned way, but indeed the way that things tend to exist. Now, the other point that obviously, needless to say, is top of mind for many businesses right now, but certainly small businesses, I'd say snow businesses. Anyway, is Brexit, and needless to say, that one is one that everybody's trying to wrap their heads around. Obviously, something we have known about for now years, but actually, from a reality perspective, working through that paperwork is something completely different. So yeah, a major sticking point in our conversation with many of our members in our community is the whole challenge that has thrown. One thing to say, I love listening. I'm not sure if anybody else heard it, but I loved listening to Samantha Cameron on BBC Radio 4's Woman's Hour a couple of weeks ago with presenter Emma Barnett. If you didn't hear it, go and listen. It's just a wonderful interview, full stop. But it's really interesting because, of course, she talks about the fact that she is a small business owner. You know, she has her fashion business, Sefin, and then she talks about how that's been affected. Now, of course, I'm sure everybody is aware, but for anybody that may not be, she is the wife of the former Prime Minister David Cameron, who is, of course, responsible for the EU referendum in the first place. So there is a lot of irony in that whole conversation. And what I loved, actually, is that she very rightly said that she would really like to give Boris Johnson her perspective on the impact that Brexit is having on small businesses, which I thought was really, really wonderful. Now, I'm not going to profess, and I'm sure, Rosanna, you feel the same, not going to profess to being any sort of expert on the topic of Brexit whatsoever. I'm fairly lucky that it does not impact my day-to-day in terms of the business that we have. But there are, of course, many people that are within our community right now who it does affect, and there are also many people who are experts beyond us. So I think one of the things that we thought it would be useful to do is just point people in some of the direction of some of those names. We couldn't talk about small business without mentioning this subject. I think that's the important thing. But it is very, very hard to obviously get your head around it. It is an absolute minefield to be dealing with right now. And that's really what we talked about in our roundtable, actually, is just how to get your head around it all and where to go to for the advice to move things in the right direction. And I think what was at least reassuring about it was that everyone is in the same boat, which of course is the point. So everyone is scrabbling to learn what they have to do, and everyone is trying to do that in a way that doesn't impact the business in a negative way, or of course the customer as well. And I think that's the point, the sticking point that people had the most concern around. So we spent a lot of our roundtable discussing the merits of things like setting up as a registered business in the EU directly, in addition to here in the UK, so as to get around some of the border issues when it comes to exports. Amazingly, that is actually something the government is genuinely recommending right now, which again, the irony of that is just really something. But we also talked about things like exploring the best places to produce now. You know, maybe those locations have shifted in order to help with all of this too. So Turkey, reportedly, again, I'm not an expert, but hearing this from someone else, Turkey is reportedly a very straightforward option currently for exactly that reason when it comes to, production. But just to point people in the right direction, if anybody hasn't already and is interested or needs to know about this subject, do go and check out all of the work that Fashion Roundtable are doing. They're really leading on this for our industry. They've penned an open letter to the government, which we will share the link for here. One part of it, I just want to read this one part. It reads, the government has offered the fishing industry a £23 million package to support their export business. Fishing contributes as much to the UK economy as East London does from the fashion and textile industry, employing the same workforce as Topshop alone. Topshop maybe pre-ASOS situation. Parity in support is vital if we are to save not only the 890,000 jobs across the UK fashion and textile industry, but also to show leadership in being the sustainable innovator we could be. So again, lots of interconnections there into everything else that we're talking about, shaping the future of fashion. Now, that letter, very worth reading. Hannah has just shared the link. That goes on to ask for very specific things, such as adding garment workers to the shortage occupation visa list, rescinding decisions to stop the VAT retail export scheme, And as mentioned, supporting the sector with the same level of recognition and financial support offered to other industries. There is a hell of a lot more to play out within all of this still, but it's amazing to see what Fashion Roundtable is doing to support it, all of which now comes under the header. If you want to indeed get involved or go and have a look via social media for more of it, the header is "Don't Make Fashion History." That's the campaign. And it's basically calling on everyone to help raise awareness on the basis of then keeping pressure on the government to respond, and importantly to set up a dedicated meeting roundtable discussion about it. So hopefully that's something that they will succeed in and we will all get to see. One further thing that I want to share is the link to a report written by the team at Live Frankly. This is just great for small business. It's a guide on how to deal with all things Brexit in terms of shipping. So it lays out all of the different options and what they mean and what they cost, which is really, really helpful. So yeah, go and check that out. The founder, Lizzie, shared that in a WhatsApp group that I'm in, and I know that everybody responded very favourably to the help that that's provided. So yeah, in case that's useful for anyone. And I think one of the things to mention here, just bringing it back to the roundtable discussion that we had, is that this is also important because this added uncertainty, excuse me, and of course the mounting costs that come with Brexit do bring with them significant further issues for businesses when it comes to survival right now. And also beyond survival, that idea of growth, that idea of, how can we continue to grow in the future? And the reason that we believe in this so much, as I know most people listening will, is that, small business is so important within the change that we want to see in the sector more broadly when it comes to a sort of sustainable future and a sustainable economy. So lots in there, I think, around that idea of survival and growth, right?
So much, and you have just shared such a great little library of links there. Everybody, I'm going to be putting them in our stories tomorrow. I'll put them up because invaluable for everyone. Thank you, Rachel. And actually, I should also say, I meant to say at the beginning, but if anybody has any questions or thoughts they would like to share about this topic, please add them to the comments, and we have some time at the end to look at all of that. So yeah, I mean, when Rachel and I were first putting together this very topic, it really did come down to what you were just mentioning, Rach, this idea of growth versus risk. Because if you're a small business, your aim is comes back to your very first point of that podcast that caught your eye, or rather your ear. We are a society based on growth. That is always the big ambition. And there's also this idea of survival versus sustainability. So I just, before we finish, wanted to look at those two juxtapositions, growth versus risk and survival versus sustainability. So as we keep saying, there have been massive success stories over 2020 and into 2021. The usual route when that happens would be to scale, to push that growth, to seek investment and to manage that risk. Is that even feasible in this environment? So investment, rather like Brexit, is just too big a topic for us to cover on this live. But I did want to just mention briefly that certainly from our conversations on the roundtable, it is still an active space right now. Despite everything, the main takeaway right now is that beyond the need for obviously the killer pitch deck, alongside that, the number crunching presentation, the usual tools that you need when pitching to investors, it was mentoring that is so important right now. And we had various examples on the call of mentors that, yes, coached in business strategy and coached the founders and helped them in their growth, but also who might perhaps eventually lead to becoming investors. And I think it's worth mentioning mentoring in this position here, because we obviously as FashMash have our own mentoring scheme, Young Pioneers, which launched last year, and we'll do another cohort this year. Yes, there is that side. And I think people always think of mentoring as something for people at the start of their career, but it is so much more than that. And it is invaluable for all stages of career. Right now, with networking opportunities being what they are, the main takeaway from the roundtable was this is the time to DM, to send a LinkedIn message. The worst that can happen is that you get a no, but do your research, find the right fit of mentor and approach them right now. time is of the essence, and that invaluable wisdom and experience is just as important now as ever before. And yeah, take that plunge, because there were actually on our roundtable many success stories that have come through mentoring. I think also the roundtable was a really fascinating exploration of what it means to seek funding. It's always worth saying, along with the importance of a mentor, the risk of relinquishing creative control or relinquishing majority equity is something that should be avoided at all costs, pun intended. We're thinking that investment could be a great topic for the future, for a live or perhaps for a pioneers session. So Rachel and I that's on our radar. It's on our strategic think tank sessions and brainstorming sessions. But for now, we would love to just share Antoine Nassenbaum, who is one of the co-founders of Felix Capital. We interviewed him for FashMash Pioneers 2.5 years ago, and Rachel has also interviewed him on various other occasions. So Hannah will just share now a link to an interview with him. He always has some very excellent perspective on the investment sphere. And then, yeah, survival, finally. Another conundrum it's very important to raise. It's one thing that we, I think, might forget, because small businesses, being fashion ones, are probably, they're always glamorous, but you forget that there is still the juggle of homeschooling and lockdown and all of the repercussions of that for these founders. Has sustainability been pushed to the bottom of the agenda because of that daily struggle and juggle? Livelihoods are at stake, jobs are at risk. Surely that's a higher priority. I spoke to sustainable textile designer and Green Carpet Fashion Award winner Sindusu Kumalo for my recent EcoAge article, which was really an examination of sustainability in 2021 and the landscape of that. She was fascinating to speak to, and she cited overriding financial concerns as the reason many businesses are just losing momentum when it comes to slow fashion. To quote her directly, "As businesses are forced to make cuts due to the pandemic, I hope that they will not be making cuts to their sustainability endeavours." Likewise, Shailja Dubey, who is the programme leader of the British Fashion Council, she has spoken at one of our lives before and is absolutely brilliant. The programme leader of the British Fashion Council's Institute for Positive Change. I misquoted her title there slightly. But she is acutely aware of the challenges facing businesses, inevitably because of her position at the BFC. She told me many in our industry are unable to make business decisions based upon any reason but for survival as a result of the pandemic. Can business leaders step up, lead the way for international collaboration, and be the power for change? I think the positive here is that businesses of this size are often built from the ground up with sustainability in mind. And this is where I want to finish for today. Going back to that article by Livia Firth for Vogue Arabia that I mentioned at the very start of our conversation. It examines this piece, the potential for renaissance in 2021 via independent designers who are driving sustainable change. Livia begins the article. "When you look at the current fashionscape, you can often feel caught between a rock and a hard place. On one side, fast fashion, aka disposable, and on the other side, luxury fashion, aka unapproachable. While these two suffered immeasurably due to the pandemic and still don't have a clue on how to go forward, another sector has figured it out: the emerging and independent designers." Now, for this article, she interviews Stefan Siegel, who is founder of Not Just a Label, talking of scaling back when he launched it in 2008. It had just 500 independent designers, and now it has 48,000 on that platform, which is remarkable. Whoa. Yeah, it's so impressive.
I didn't know that. Yeah. That's amazing.
Quite something how it scales. And his quote to Livia is just a perfect note on which to end. "The winning argument here is that independent designers can solve all the problems we have in the fashion industry because they can create items that are loved, that people do not throw away. They know their supply chain, they adopt zero waste policies because they cannot afford to be wasteful." It's down to the consumer and the industry to support these designers.
Yes, totally. And I think that's such an amazing example. And actually goes back to exactly what we were saying around this notion that as you said, they have to, these small emerging designers, small businesses, local businesses, etc. They can't afford to be anything but, actually, which is incredible. And that's exactly why, as we said earlier, that we've had so many examples of small businesses within our community doing really, really well at the moment. And it's for exactly those reasons, which is really, really positive, actually, that survival can also be sustainable. So yeah, fingers crossed, all pointing in the right direction. And growth, importantly, can be sustainable too. Degrowth is not about recession, essentially. That's the simplest way of putting it. It's not about everybody stopping growing. It's about the right kind of businesses. So that's incredible to think of in this context.
Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. And thank you very much, Rachel, for joining me for the very first one of the year. And thank you once again to Klaviyo for all your help for bringing another FashMash live and focus session to fruition as the year begins. See you all soon.
Thank you, Rosanna. See everyone soon. Bye.